Let's take a closer look at the domains of the Eubacteria and the Archaea, and that will be chapter 11 in Tortora. So here's a nice overview slide that shows you what we're going to take a look at in this lecture. We will be taking a look at the bacteria separate, the gram-positives and the gram-negatives. So you can see the gram-negatives, it's a pretty large group right here, including the very large group of the Proteobacteria, and then cyanobacteria and a bunch of others. Among the gram-positives, we'll take a look at the two phyla, actually, so the gram-positives, gram-negatives separate. And then we have the Archaea, and take a look at what we have in there. Okay, so let's start with this very large group of the Proteobacteria. They are gram-negatives, and they got their name from this Greek god Proteus that was able to assume many shapes. And so you can expect that this is a very diverse group of bacteria. They're all gram-negatives. They're chemoheterotrophic, so they can't photosynthesize, and it's the largest taxonomic group of bacteria, and you will see how large they are. There are 5 classes. And we're going to start with the alpha proteobacteria. So the first class, the alpha proteobacteria. And these guys in general are capable of growing with very low levels of nutrients. Many of them produce these buds or stalks to attach to a surface that's called prostheses. And here are some examples on the alpha proteobacteria. So Cholobacter, very abundant microorganism in oceans and saltwater, very small, very low nutrient requirement, and plays an important role in Earth's carbon cycle. Here are some other important alpha proteobacteria. That would be Spirulum and Acidicthiobacter and Cholobacter. These guys, Acidicthiobacter and Cholobacter, you may have heard about these. They convert ethanol, so drinking alcohol, into acetic acid, producing vinegar. The Spirulum grows in the soil, forms associations with roots, and can fix nitrogen, which is nice. Fixing nitrogen means that you take gaseous nitrogen from the atmosphere and fix it into nitrates, which is, of course, then a fertilizer for plants. So the Spirulum is nice to have around with plants. And then here, more alpha proteobacteria. Here's a group that actually we have in our pathogens, because a lot of them are intracellular parasites that can make you sick. So all the rickettsias are obligate intracellular parasites, and some of them can make you very sick. They cause what we call these spotted fevers. So we have Rickettsia pruvasicii. That's the cause of epidemic typhus, and we will have that on a pathogen group. Then we have Rickettsia typhi. That is endemic murine typhus. And then we have Rickettsia rickettsii, and that one causes RMSF, also known as Rocky Mountain Spotted Fever. So Rocky Mountain Spotted Fever is RMSF. These rickettsias are transmitted to humans by insects and ticks. So we will cover them in more detail, actually, in the pathogen groups. And then we have Ehrlichia. They're also transmitted by ticks. They're also alpha proteobacteria, cause ehrlichiosis, which is probably a disease that you've never heard about. It's not very common. But here's a nice picture of rickettsias. They are intracellular parasites, and they're pretty small. So you can see sort of the rickettsias here in the nucleus, masses of rickettsias in the nucleus, and here scattered rickettsias. So scattered ones here, these dark spots. They're pretty small. And you can see that in this larger eukaryotic cell. Continuing with more alpha proteobacteria, we have Cholobacter and Eiffel microbium. You probably have never heard of them. They also have this very low nutrient requirement. Mostly they are in aquatic environments, and they form these stalks and prostheses. They reproduce via budding rather than binary fission, which makes them kind of similar to yeast-like growth that also reproduces by budding. But anyway, so here's an example, pretty exotic actually. Cholobacter, here you can see these stalks, and they're forming sort of a means of attachment here. And here's another example, Eiffel microbium, a type of budding bacterium. You can see how there's a bud coming off. So a bud is like a little one coming off here, and eventually it may even stay on or it pinches off. Okay. More alpha proteobacteria, Rhizobium, Brady Rhizobium. They fix nitrogen in the roots of leguminous plants. Fixing nitrogen is always a nice thing for plants because when you're able to capture nitrogen from the atmosphere and make that into nitrates, of course, that works like a fertilizer for plants, so that's a nice thing. They are often known by the common name of Rhizobia. Agrobacterium, that one is actually pretty important. It can actually transform plant cells, and so sometimes it's used in biotechnology to introduce new genes to plants and transform plants. So it's a plant pathogen. It causes a crown gall. Basically, they call it Agrobacterium tumefaciens because it causes a tumor to grow. But the nice thing is it inserts plasmids into plant cells, thereby giving them new genetic information. Remember, a plasmid is a small circle of DNA that contains genetic information. And this agrobacterium, it does induce a tumor. So here's what that looks like. So here you can see this tumor growth that's caused by Agrobacterium tumefaciens. Okay, and we are still not done with the alpha proteobacteria. So we have some more species here. Bartonella. And that one is a human pathogen. You may not have heard about it. We don't even have it on our pathogen group because it's pretty rare, but Bartonella hensleyi, that's cat scratch disease. And then we have Brucella. These are obligate parasites of mammals. They survive phagocytosis, which makes them pretty dangerous. And they cause the brucellosis. And that one, we have that on a pathogen group. So we will pick this one up again. And still not done with alpha proteobacteria. We have Nitrobacter, Nitrosomonas. These are chemoautotrophic bacteria, and they use inorganic chemicals for the energy source. CO2 as a gas from the atmosphere as a carbon source. So Nitrosomonas, that one can convert ammonia, NH4 to nitrite, NO2 minus, and Nitrobacter will convert nitrite to nitrate, NO3 minus. So just for your information, we do not have these on any other pathogen group, so you will not hear about them again. And here is an interesting fellow, Wolbachia. This one is an endosymbiont of insects and affects the reproduction of insects. So you can use Wolbachia if you want to control insect populations. So here, I have the next slide will explain that. Wolbachia, they are red inside of this fruit fly embryo. So these little red dots, that's the Wolbachia inside of a fruit fly embryo. And basically, I don't want to spend much time on it, but you can use a bacterium like this that affects the reproductive cycle, the reproductive power of insects. You can control insect populations with that because you will basically create sterile females that are no longer producing the masses of insects that they normally would be able to. Okay, so moving on to the beta proteobacteria, and here we have Acidicthiobacillus. This one is chemoautotrophic and oxidizes sulfur to sulfates. So it will take hydrogen sulfide, which is a smelly gas, smells like rotten eggs, and it will convert it to an oxidized sulfur to sulfate. And then we have Spirulum. That one's found in fresh water and moves via this endoflagellum or spirulum. And then we have Spherotilus. This one is found in freshwater sewage, and you will probably never hear about this one again. But the Spirulum, you definitely will hear about it. So here's Spirulum volutons. That one, we actually have a slide in our prepared slide boxes. So you actually saw this one on a slide already. Here it is again, Spirulum volutons. Looks pretty cool, actually. And has sort of this very curvy body, and then on top of that, flagella on both ends. And here's another interesting fellow, Ceratylus neatens. This one you probably will never hear again. It looks pretty cool, actually. So not kind of interesting, these bacterial cells. Okay, then we have more beta proteobacteria. There we two groups here, Burkholderia and bordetella. The first one you probably have never heard and probably will never hear again. Burkholderia cepacia. That one can degrade organic molecules and is probably useful for degrading maybe oil spills or other organic material that will be found in waste and could be dangerous, environmental hazard. The next one, Burkholderia pseudomonas. This one causes melioidosis, and you probably never hear about it again. We don't have this one on pathogen groups. However, the next one, bordetella. This is an important pathogen. The bordetellas, they are non-motile rods, and this one in particular has caused a lot of problems, but now there's an effective vaccine available, and so therefore it no longer causes these problems. Although whooping cough has been popping up here and there, because too many people choose to no longer vaccinate their children, which is pretty dangerous. But anyway, Bordetella pertussis, the cause of whooping cough. We already had this one in our pathogen group number 1, so definitely one a beta proteobacterium that you should know about. And here is another one that causes problems. Neisseria, that's a group of beta proteobacteria that can cause very serious disease. Here we have the Neisseria gonorrhea. That's a sexually transmitted disease. It's also one that we had on the on our prepared slides already, so we were already taking a look at this pathogen. And so Neisseria gonorrhea, that's the cause of gonorrhea, a sexually transmitted disease. And then we have Neisseria meningitis, and this one is the cause of meningococcal meningitis, and this is very serious. If you come down with meningococcal meningitis, that's very serious and can kill you. There is a vaccine available for Neisseria meningitis, but not for Neisseria gonorrhea, as far as I know. Zooglua, these are important for activated sludge systems. So if you go to a sewage place, where they are sort of cleaning up wastewater, that's what's called activated sludge, when they take the sewage water and trying to clear it so that at least it can be used to water lawns and something like that. There apparently Zooglua is important, but we will not talk about it again. Okay, so here is a nice picture of Neisseria gonorrhea. The bacteria in red there, and the host cell membrane sort of in this golden color. It's kind of a cool image right here. Okay, we're done with the beta proteobacteria, moving on to gamma proteobacteria. And so here we're starting out with Diodetrichlis, very rare kind of bacterium. You'll probably never hear about it again. So Vegeatua, this one grows in aquatic sediments, and it is chemoautotrophic and can oxidize hydrogen sulfide to elemental sulfur for energy, which is pretty interesting, but we will not talk about it again. And then we have Francisella. This one we will have in a pathogen group, especially Francisella tularensis, the cause of tularemia. This one you will hear about again in a pathogen group. And here more gamma proteobacteria. So here we have the very large group of the Pseudomonadales, and these are Pseudomonas, and there's a bunch of them. They're opportunistic pathogens, so that means they don't make you normally sick, but if you are immunocompromised or you get a good dose in a place where it's not supposed to be, then they can cause infections, and they're usually hard to treat because the Pseudomonas, they're gram-negatives, and your immune system has a hard time spotting them. So once you're infected with Pseudomonas, they're hard to treat with antibiotics, and your immune system altogether has already a hard time with that. So they are opportunistic pathogens. It means usually immunocompromised people are much more affected, and they are often seen as nosocomial infections. That means they were hospital acquired, so you got that infection in the hospital. They have very diverse metabolism. A lot of times they're colored. So picture this: you had a bad cold, and then now you have green snot coming out of your nose. That would most likely be a superinfection or a secondary infection with Pseudomonas, because they tend to be greenish, so greenish snot or yellowish sputum out of your lungs when you're coughing after a bad bronchitis. That would indicate it's probably Pseudomonas that's causing the problem. Pseudomonas, they have polar flagella, common in soil, and very common bacterium is Pseudomonas aeruginosa. This one is very common as a cause of wound or urinary tract infections. So these, a lot of times, catheters can cause infections with Pseudomonas aeruginosa. That would be then a nosocomial infection. So they're pretty nice to look at, though. Yeah, the Pseudomonas, two guys. They definitely have motility. They have this long flagellum that helps them move, and you can see the pigmentation that they have. And here's some more Pseudomonadalis, the Acidicthiobacter and Azomonas. These are nitrogen fixers. And then we have Moraxella. There is one member that's causing conjunctivitis. That's Moraxella lacunata. We do not have this one on a pathogen group, though. And then we have Acinetobacter. There's the Acinetobacter baumannii. That's a respiratory pathogen, and it's pretty dangerous because it's resistant to antibiotics, but we will not have this one on a pathogen group either. We have a few more gamma proteobacteria here, the Legionellalis, namely Legionella. That one likes to hide out in water pipes and cooling towers. It's the cause of legionellosis, which is otherwise known as the Legionnaire's disease. So every now and then you hear, sometimes on cruise ships they have outbreaks of Legionnaire's disease. So that's caused by Legionella, and we do have that one on a pathogen group. And here we have Coxiella. So this one, the example Coxiella burnitia, to be specific for a species. The cause of Q fever, we do not have this one on a pathogen group, but still, this one you may have heard about already. Also likes to be in water bodies, aerosols, also in milk. And here we have a picture of Coxiella burnitia, the cause of Q fever. It's not too much that you can see right here on that, the endospore-like body E here at the arrow. Okay, so here let's another important group of gamma proteobacteria, the Vibrionalis, and there we have a very important pathogen that we already covered in our pathogen groups. So this one found in aquatic habitats. Oh, actually, no, we have not covered this one yet, but we will. Vibrio cholerae, the cause of cholera, and that is a comma-shaped bacterium, cause of cholera. So this one, it causes problems and outbreaks when there's water, contaminated water wells. So let's say after an earthquake or a natural catastrophe, the water is contaminated, and then Vibrio cholerae can cause really bad diarrhea, cholera. And then we have Vibrio parahemolyticus, that one causes gastroenteritis, but we do not have this one on a pathogen group. So here you can see the typical Vibrio shape, the comma shape of these bacteria. And yeah, we talked about the Vibrio shape already. So more gamma proteobacteria. This is a very large group of the enterobacterialis. also often called enterics, and they are inhabitants of the intestinal tract. They can ferment carbohydrates, they're facultative anaerobes, they have peritrichous flagella, and the most important one of these is your famous Escherichia coli, E. coli. So here we're going to have E. coli first. And that one is, whenever you find these coliform bacteria, especially E. coli, that's an indicator of fecal contamination, because these are intestinal inhabitants. In some cases, certain strains, they can cause foodborne disease, especially the 0157H7 strain of E. coli. That one can cause bloody diarrhea, and we'll talk about that in a pathogen group. Sometimes when E. coli is introduced into a urinary tract via a catheter, for example, it can also cause UTIs, urinary tract infections. And then we have a very large group of the salmonella bacteria. There are 2,400 serovars, so different versions of salmonella. They're all salmonellas, but they're slightly different from one another, so thousands of different serovars. A pretty common form of foodborne illness, that would be, salmonella bacteria causing the typical diarrhea or the cramping that you get with salmonella infection. So there are two main types of salmonella infections, and that would be the salmonella typhi that causes the typhoid fever, and then the salmonella enterica. But we will talk about these in much more detail in a pathogen group. And here we're still not done with the gamma proteobacteria. So we have here more shigella. This one can cause dysentery, so diarrhea, basically. Klebsiella pneumoniae, the cause of pneumonia. We will have this one on a pathogen group. And then serratia. If we were doing lab on site, we would work a lot with serratia because it grows red colonies. It has this red pigment that makes it very easy to work with, and it also grows very easily. And so serratia is a nice lab bacterium to work with. And but it can also cause nosocomial infections, that be also like urinary tract infections. Nosocomial always means hospital acquired. And more gamma proteobacteria. We have proteus. That one is a very large group, and they have a lot of motility. They're easily grown. They're pretty ubiquitous, so pretty much many environments. And then Yersinia, there's an important pathogen that has caused much problem over the centuries. Yersinia pestis, a very important pathogen, the cause of plague. And there were outbreaks of plague in Europe that caused whole cities to be decimated and kill millions of people. It's transmitted via fleas and rats, and we will talk about this pathogen, of course, in a pathogen group. And then here's a more rare one that you may not have heard about, and you will probably not hear about it again. Erwinia, that's a plant pathogen. So here we have some examples. This was proteusmirabilis. Peritrichous flagella, you can see the flagella everywhere, and there you can see here in this plate the swarming colonies of proteus. They're just swimming everywhere. They don't like to settle down and sit still. Basically, they move around a lot. Okay, and then here the enterobacterialis, continued enterobacter. There would be enterobacter cholerae, and then we have also enterobacter aerogenes, those that cause urinary tract infections and also nosocomial infections, hospital acquired. Then we have Cholobacter. This one, apparently discovered in 2007. You probably have never heard of it. So Cholobacter sakazakii causes meningitis. We do not have this one in a pathogen group, so you probably never hear about it again. And then more gamma proteobacteria here, the pasterella. This one is pretty important. It's a pathogen of animals typically, but we do not have it on our human pathogen groups. And then also pasterella multicida is transmitted via animal bites, but again you will not hear about this one again. Now the next one is important, Haemophilus. They require this X factor for heme and V factor and media in order to grow, but they are pretty fastidious. That means they're hard to grow in plates. But there's an important pathogen that you will hear again in a pathogen group, Haemophilus influenzae, causes meningitis, earaches, epiglottitis, and this one, we have a vaccine, but again, you will hear more about this one in a pathogen group. And finally, we're out of the gamma proteobacteria, so moving on to delta proteobacteria. There we have a couple of exotics, bedello, Vibrio. That one can attack sort of it's parasitic to other bacteria, so it attacks other gram-negative bacteria. And then the D-sulfovibrio-nalis. This D-sulfovibrio are found in anaerobic sediments, intestinal tract. You will not hear about them again. Here is a bedello bacterium that is bacteriovorous. That means it eats other bacteria. So this one is kind of a predator on other bacteria. Okay, and then we have the delta proteobacteria, the myxococcales. Myxo refers to mucus, and then these guys, they move by gliding and they leave this slime trail. So I'm not a big fan of anything slimy, but anyway, for what it's worth, myxococcales, we do not have them on a pathogen group. And so here, this is a life cycle of myxobacterium that I find not too interesting. So I think we're going to skip over this. And then here are the final group for remember there were 5 groups of the proteobacteria. So we had alpha, beta, gamma, delta, and here comes our 5th group, the epsilon proteobacteria. And these guys, there are some important pathogens here. They're helical or curved, microaerophilic. That means they need some oxygen, but less than what's normally found in the air. So they are found sort of somewhat in a like a gelatin stab. They will be settling sort of underneath the surface. They don't like too much oxygen, but they need some oxygen. Here we have Campylobacter. This one has one polar flagellum. We will talk about this one again in a pathogen group as Campylobacter jejuni. Causes diarrhea. And Helicobacter, this one can cause stomach cancer because it drills itself into your stomach walls, and it can cause cancer, stomach cancer. So it also can cause peptic ulcers. And a lot of times it's a good idea if you have stomach problems, too much acid production maybe, or you have gastritis, and it doesn't go away with some Pepcid or with some Tums, then you might want to get it checked out and see if you need a round of antibiotics to get rid of Helicobacter pylori, which can also then cause stomach cancer, and it would be a good idea to get rid of. So here is our Helicobacter pylori, and it has this curvy appearance, and flagella right here drills itself into your stomach walls, and very importantly, it can cause not just ulcers, but it can cause stomach cancer. And so a ulcer or a stomach that hurts and that is inflamed and it doesn't go away with Nexium or with Tums simply or something like that, or you can neutralize the acid, good idea to see if you get tested for Helicobacter pylori, and then you will require a round of antibiotics to get rid of this fellow here. And this concludes our proteobacteria, so I'm going to stop right here and start another recording with a different group of bacteria.